welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Stephen Greer. I'm the founder of the Disclosure Project. I'm an emergency doctor, retired now, emergency medicine and trauma. I have been working in this area for about 33 years as a volunteer and as a provider of information to people in the United States government. You're seeing behind me a moment ago this event 22 years ago on May 9th, 2001. At that event, there were 22 folks who came forward, and that information is all on our website and on YouTube, and those were folks who actually, some of them, who handled extraterrestrial bodies called EBINs, extraterrestrial biological entities, handled craft, were on retrieval teams, all kinds of witnesses. Now, that got a certain amount of attention in Congress, but they weren't ready at that time to do hearings, which they're preparing for. I understand from people in the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee. And so over the last 16 months, I've been asked to provide as much intelligence as I can to folks who have been working to get to the bottom of this since the Congress passed a law requiring the Director of National Intelligence to come forward with information to the extent that he had it. Now, one of the problems with that process is that, and I discovered this in 1993, in December 13th of that year, when I briefed the director of the CIA at the time, R. James Woolsey, for then President Clinton. He and the president had been waved off and not given information on this subject. That's when, as a young doctor, I realized that this was being run outside appropriate oversight and supervision by the Office of the President and the Congress, and that is just a fact. So at that point, of course, it sort of upended my life in many ways, but we began to try to get information to the executive branch further, do research, provide whistleblower testimony, but it was all done very quietly. I then started providing information to folks in the Congress, such as Representative Dan Burton, who was chairman of the Government House Reform and Oversight Committee, Senator Dick Bryan, Nevada, ironically, home of Area 51, on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and many others. Those proceedings went forward as a volunteer effort, and all of this is still a volunteer effort. We're unfunded volunteers. And I do want to thank every one of the people here who made this happen, all these military whistleblowers coming forward, and our staff, and most of all my wife, Emily. I will tell you, if my wife, Emily, hadn't been a rock, we wouldn't be here. She's amazing. So, we got married 44 years ago in August, this coming August. So, and we have 4 kids, 12 grandkids. So, ironically, my grandkids are the ages of my daughters when I started this process. So it's beautiful, but like, really? Why is this taking so long? So in my young years, I thought, okay, we'll get this information to the president and key people in the Congress. I'll go back to my normal life, taking care of shootings and stabbings and what have you, and off we go. Well, that didn't happen, as you all know, or you would have known. And I think the media has played a very key role recently in covering this, and there are whistleblowers beginning to come out in other settings besides this, and I applaud them, and I think more should do so. Now, the history of this is important because if you look at the testimony we have already, it's something like 70 to 80 people that we have debriefed, videotaped, have their transcripts, and it's available to the media and the public through our website and our YouTube channel. We've very transparently put out everything we can. To an extent, a not-for-profit entity can do it with volunteers and no office and no staff. So I don't want people to not get too grand here. This has been a volunteer effort for 33 years, and those people are heroes, as are these men up on the stage with me today. Now, and just a quick trip through some of the previous witnesses. We had Sergeant Clifford Stone. He was on an NBC team nuclear, biological, chemical back in the 60s, was actively involved in retrieving extraterrestrial vehicle and bodies, what have you. They were called EBINs, extraterrestrial biological entities. We have his testimony. It's there for anyone to see. We have people like John Callahan, who was the top accident investigator at the FAA when the Japan Airlines event happened in the 1980s during the Reagan years, and they tried to cover it up. He took the original FAA tracking tapes. The Disclosure Project have the originals, and you're welcome to see them. Those of you in the media, we can try to get those to you. So all of these sort of testimonies and witnesses have come forward already. But now we're at the stage where there's real utility, because the official law now is that the government has mandated the Pentagon, the intelligence community, to research this and report back to Congress. Now, there's a problem we'll get into in a moment with that whole process, which is important that you understand, and particularly the media understand. But first, I want to tell you what we've handed off this week to the Congress and to the White House and to the Pentagon AARO office, the AARO office that's tasked with investigating this. So we can go through the list of the material in the archive. It has government documents in the tens of thousands from all those countries: United States, Canada, Australia, Russia, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, and others. We have 145 top secret facilities, some of which are black sites, that are named and on a map, and you'll see them in a moment. The supporting documentation of it are in the archive, meaning the witnesses' testimony, who they were, when they were there, where the locations is, sometimes up to where the gate is. And that's been handed over to the United States government this week. There are 752 and counting whistleblowers who've come forward over the years. Some of them are now deceased, but what's important, even the ones who are deceased, if you go to their history and their command and what they provided, there is an investigative thread to follow back in. Very important. There are also files with all these witness testimonies that have been provided up to date. In the archive are 121. We learned of another one last night from a very high level whistleblower who is not ready to come forward. So there's actually 122 crash retrieval cases of these UAPs. And those are documented. Michael Schratt, who is an aerospace historian and is working full-time with us beginning in November, had worked for Lockheed, but not the Skunk Works, on conventional operations. And he is doing those investigations for us, and also the beautiful illustrations of what these witnesses have had to share, and you will see those. Then we also have the documents that includes names of witnesses. In other words, government documents that are not declassified that we have. Now, we'll get into this in a minute. And there are many so-called deep throats who provide intel in the background, who are working with us, some of whom are very senior in these operations. Others are people who have just incidentally been involved. Okay, next. So this is just a thumb pictures of all these guys that we already have come forward. They're there for you to see. They run from NASA folks and all that. It's in the YouTube channel. It's in the archive. Those were done, all these were up to 2001. So we're talking a long time ago, but those exist. It's perhaps a tree that fell in the woods a lot of you didn't know about. Next. And I want to go through this very quickly. This is just a scrolling list of the witness list. Each one of these witnesses has a file where they have either been interviewed or provide intelligence and corresponded with me, and that I have debriefed personally over the last 30 years. So you're going to see this goes on for about 100 named persons, and then it becomes a black list. It just has to be blacked out. Why? I'm not holding anything back except what I've been requested to by people whose confidence I have told them I will keep. So I'm a medical doctor. We understand patient, doctor confidentiality, like an attorney understands that. But until these guys want to be unmasked and come forward, we will not disclose their names, except the redacted list is something available to the media and to the public now. And in addition to that, and it's very important, the unredacted list and the full files, including all my correspondence files, are in the unredacted archive. It's about, let's see, isn't it cool that you can put terabytes on something like this? This is all it is, but it's about a terabyte. We have about 8 terabytes of information. We're in the process of scanning it and trying to put it into a searchable database. This has been provided to the intelligence community, as I mentioned, the Pentagon, Congress, and the White House. It is also the redacted version would be available to the media if you can help us get it on a hard drive. We're really not funded properly, and each of these costs several $100s, so we gave it 1,000 of them. It's more than we've ever had. But nevertheless, it is an open archive. Eventually, we want to have it on an internet site, but the names that you're seeing now, you're going to see all their information is blacked out, and it's because they've asked not to be named. Now, they can be known by people who are working in a SCIF and have a vault, and who have the ability to then pursue it in the interest of national security. That has been provided to these key offices. So I just wanted to give you that as sort of an overview of how the list was constructed. It is by no means complete. We have a new whistleblower coming forward every week or two now at this point. And Michael Schratzer nodding his head, yeah, this has become a torrent. And so we want to set up a mechanism. We're recommending that you'll hear what our recommendations are for the President and Congress to resolve this crisis. Next. So I wanted to mention that these bases, if you look at them, let's go to, this is where all these illegal operations have happened. I'm saying illegal because we can prove that this information, as Senator Inouye said, you'll hear his statement in a moment, has been run by a very shadowy, deep black operation, and we're not talking the legal black budget of the United States. We're talking about projects that presidents and CI directors and secretaries of defense and members of the Congress who have a need to know and are cleared TSSCI in SCIFs, secure compartmented information facilities, have been blatantly either gaslit, denied access. That is the foundation of everything we've done, is that these projects are a priori illegal and therefore unconstitutional and have to be reined in, because not doing so is a threat to the national security. So here is your list. I'm not going to go through 145 sites. Some of them are black sites. Some of them are bases you know about, like Wright-Patterson, Edwards, Nellis, Area 51, so-called. But all of them are based on witness testimony and intelligence we've gathered over the last 30 years, and it's time for it to be disclosed. And so now you have it. Next. Here's one, and people go out in the Mojave Desert. Michael Schratt took this picture when it was okay to fly near it in a small private plane. It is a site for the Lockheed Range underground entrance. What's in there? Well, there are man-made, and this is the big story, no one's telling you. A large number of the UAPs are in fact deep black budget electrogravitic, electromagnetic field propulsion devices based on the study of extraterrestrial vehicles that began in the 1940s. That is a fact, we can prove it. So when you see these sort of places, just remember many of them, I want to be careful what I'm saying here. Someone who is in charge of the black budget of the United States in 2022 and went out to the Lockheed Skunk Works based on some information he had. He was shown a bunch of old jet aircraft. He knew he was being gaslit, and they reached out to me and I said, what do you want? I'll give you everything we have. And that's what's happened over the last 16 months. So I cannot name this person, but they're a wonderful person of enormous integrity and a hero of our country. So I want to just go through quickly some of the new ones who aren't here. Now, the reason these have initials, they're waiting to be cleared for coming forward publicly. They're afraid. And let me explain to you why they are. This man, here's just his incoming letter. We get these every day. Now, he's afraid he'll lose his pension. He signed an 80-year non-disclosure agreement. He has been threatened, and some of these have seriously had their lives threatened. It's a very thuggish situation going on that the Department of Justice and FBI need to drill down on very quickly. Next. Here's an illustration of one event that he was involved in back when there was a extraterrestrial vehicle that crashed and then ultimately ended up at Lawton, Oklahoma, near Fort Sill. This man has been in a skiff with these objects. These illustrations are based on his direct testimony and hours of discussions since 2016. Here is a small extraterrestrial body, about 39 inches long, that was retrieved in that operation. There are extraterrestrials of various sizes. The last known count I had of different civilizations involved with this, about 60 to 70 in that range, and I think there could be more. Next. This is one of the underground command centers that he was assigned to from the Pentagon. He was with Technical Management Office and then some other offices, and investigated some criminal activities that occurred with a 3-star general related to this subject that the Department of Justice was basically unable to prosecute because they were denied access to the operations. Next. Here's one that was also in this another facility as an extraterrestrial vehicle. He actually was there very close to it. This gentleman wants to come forward. He needs to be protected, and this is why we're calling for explicit witness protection and explicit pension and asset protection for these whistleblowers. Next. And this is just an indication of a type of electromagnetic system that actually can cloak any tank or any object that we've developed over the years, and he was read into this as well. Next. So there's another gentleman. I'm going to run through these very quickly. We'd be here for 30 hours if I didn't. I'm just giving you a tip of the iceberg, right? This is a guy who is at the Dugway Proving Grounds, very key facility, MS we call him. He worked for C. Martin Corporation, a contractor, and he was in a facility that had an extraterrestrial vehicle that was being studied by scientists. He knows the chief scientist involved. He has named that individual to us, and they can all be subpoenaed now. So this object was there in 2009. He didn't know the date of acquisition, but he thought it was fairly recent. Next. He also was read into and had the chief scientist show him the location, which we now have, of a DUM, Deep Underground Military Base, that is in the Dugway sector, so-called Avery sector, A-V-E-R-Y, and it has huge capacity for parking. You go in, and there's a vast underground complex in that location. That location has been handed off to investigators with the U.S. government. Next. This gives an illustration of the size of this. You could put easily on the platform that goes down the Air Force One. It's a very large elevator, goes down underground. Next. And then we have this gentleman. He was not long ago in the Nellis Range in the Nevada test site north of Nellis Air Force Base, and he, next slide, was on a retrieval team. Now let me explain how this guy got involved. He was recruited out of Fort Campbell to be somebody to be on a retrieval team with a top secret clearance to pick up when we have an accident with a helicopter or jet, because there's classified technology on those often. And our YouTube pilot here will explain that perhaps. But the point is, he went from there, and that was preparatory to being on a retrieval team for this. So he was involved with this operation. It was a man-made, so-called alien reproduction vehicle, it's called by some people, or AT. A lot of people just call them advanced technology. It's a euphemism. But it's based on studying the electrogravitics and magnetic field propulsion systems of the interstellar vehicles that involve the science of quantum entanglement and, basically you want to go from one point in space and to another, say this is one point, this is another. You're not going through a straight line, you're folding space-time. That's how you're doing. And we're not going to do a physics lesson here, had enough of that in pre-med. But anyway, so this is an object, and I'm not a physicist, we have a physicist here. But this object was retrieved because it became disabled. Some of these retrieval operations are not extraterrestrial, but they would like sometimes the public to think maybe it was, because the bigger secret, I'll tell you right now, is not the extraterrestrial issue. It's these technologies, which an unsupervised and frankly illegal operation have, which is a threat to the national security, period. This we will prove. And this is a bigger threat, the existence of these in the hands of unsupervised operations that have escaped the oversight of the President of the Office of the President and the Congress since 1956 to 1960. Hence Eisenhower's speech, beware the military-industrial complex. This is actually what he was talking about. I know people who have since passed away, like our witness, Stephen Lubkin, who was at the White House with Eisenhower, who said point blank, the president lost control of these projects and that he was very upset and angry about it, but these projects became so compartmentalized that he no longer could control them. So this is one. You can see there are rivets and what have you. And we'll go through this later after our fine gentlemen and whistleblowers speak. But I want to give you this overview really quickly. Next. So this is actually an extraterrestrial vehicle, a very large one that was at the Nellis North Range. We have the location of the helipad. It's Delta Force manned. This occurred back in that same era, around 2009, about 65 feet across. It's seamless, but it has sort of a clamshell part of it. There was a ramp that rolled out, like he said, like a roll-up that came out of it. And there was a ARV above it that was headed in lock. It was an electromagnetic lock on this object. I think it was stunned, and that's how it was brought down. This is not infrequent. Not every day, but not infrequent. I said over the last 80 years, at least 122 have come down. So there are helicopters. He was on the team to pick up debris. This one was, of course, intact. It began to pulse and operate and came back to life, as it were. And the entire group that was there basically were put in some kind of a stasis electromagnetically. Sounds like science fiction, teleported back to the helipad instantly. But before that happened, he had this meeting with two of these extraterrestrial biological entities, a male and a female, and this is very accurate, according to the whistleblower who needs to come forward when there's adult protection. And they had no pinna, the ears outside, and had no hair, and there was a male and a female, and it was made very clear to him by these beings that they were completely non-hostile. All extraterrestrial civilizations are non-hostile. If they were hostile, the technologies they have would have been made quite clear to us in August of 1945. We'll get to this in a moment. So this, later he had an event when he tried to leave that command where there was a fake, what's called a programmed life form alien. These have been used in what you hear in the fabled lore of abductions and stuff in the UFO lore. This is actually a man-made creature, but it's not living per se. It has a covering that's skin-like. It tried to take him with one of these ARVs in command, and some people camouflaged in the ground near his truck. After he got out of this command, he was disgusted with what was happening. He no longer wanted to be part of that project, but they weren't happy he left. I told him, it's a miracle that you lived to tell this tale. And so what happened is that his pickup truck went into sort of complete lock, motor died because of this man-made UFO, UAP. He opened the door because he saw this creature, which he thought was an alien. It's not. And he hit it, it fell, he kicked it, and it split open this outer, and he saw the integrated circuits and fiber optics and what have you. This man I've dealt with quite a bit. He was ready to come to the Aero skiff. He had a nasty encounter with people who threatened him directly. This is recent. And so we have not been able to bring him to the Aero Pentagon briefing. Next. And this is one that came in 2009. We had a witness SL, we call him Coast Guard, and this is his incoming letter to me, the redacted information. And then he told us about an event off of Guam where his Coast Guard ship, which is a buoy servicing vehicle out there, was called in on a mutual assist, and he got there, and you'll see on the next picture, there was an extraterrestrial vehicle that we had downed but got lost in the deep waters there in the Marianas Trench, and it had gotten caught and tangled up in, oddly, a fisherman's net from Japan, a trawler, big one, big trawler. And so they were called in to retrieve this. He went and did retrieve it. He was part of the crew that most of them went down quarters, but with blacked out windows, he was there above ground, took a very sharp object to try to scratch it, impenetrable, could not scratch it, could not penetrate it. These are very advanced metallurgy, nanomolecular material, interstellar vehicles. Next. So what's going on with this? All of you have seen over the last 4 or 5 years these the footage come out and the Pentagon's confirmed are three-dimensional objects with sensors and what have you, the so-called Tic Tac and others. Now, I've spoken to one of the pilots who chased these objects. You've seen it on CNN, 60 Minutes, all these places. What hasn't been told when this event happened in the early 2000s is that these objects, which you'll see in a moment, particularly one of them, we have matching top secret witness testimony of them being a man-made object that our jet pilots and military don't know exists. This is dangerous in terms of deconflicting operations. So let's go to the next and play this.
Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing. It's rotated.
This is the so-called Tic Tac now.
Nickel 6-1 Tango Roger. Oh, got it! Woohoo! Roger.
Now, of course, this has been called an unknown UAP, what have you. We can excuse the Pentagon and most of the military and the White House and the Congress for not knowing what this is, because the operations that have been building these are deep black illegal, and they are not disclosing it properly to the authorities in our constitutional democracy and republic. This is based on a sighting of a group of people. Is basically the same object in the 1960s, 1967. Let's go to the next slide. And it's sort of a sketch here, the so-called vintage steam boiler. These have been seen in multiple places around since the 1950s and 60s. Next. Here's one that's a very good color illustration of it. Notice the probes on it. Extraterrestrial vehicles do not have those. These electrostatic discharge objects. We're not going to get into all the physics of this. Our team understands it, and we're welcome to share that in a longer brief with media folks. And here's the 2004 off the coast of San Diego Tic Tac. It's fundamentally the same object. Next. And here it is. We have a top secret whistleblower came forward a few months ago in 1991, so now we're talking quite some time ago, way before the 2004 event, that is offloading off a C-130, one of these UAPs, but it's actually a man-made one, and here you have the color illustration. This man is very afraid to come forward. He was warned not to, and at one point was told he would be, quote, executed. Next. So here's what we need to go through very quickly. It's a lot to unpack. This is not intended to be, we just did a 2-day conference right next door. The media are welcome to get that entire event with all the details for you if you wish to have it, or people get it to you. But basically, there are two types of these so-called UAPs, and I've said this. Some are extraterrestrial vehicles, ETVs, and some are ATs or ARVs, advanced reproduction vehicles or alien reproduction vehicles. People use different terms. The extraterrestrial groups are absolutely not hostile. However, screaming caps, they are increasingly concerned about human hostility in our weapon systems, which include nuclear and scalar, the so-called, Dr. Zahari shared this weekend, about what scalar electromagnetic fields are. But just to give you a sense of it, you all know what an electromagnetic pulse is. That's at the speed of light. The scalar systems are, instead of a wave, is a point that goes out longitudinally. Some call them longitudinal waves. These have been studied. Tesla talked about scalar systems. They have been weaponized. And those are the primary systems used to target and hit these electromagnetic field propulsion craft that cause them to fall like a rock out of the sky. You do not travel from another star system and cannot navigate a thunderstorm in New Mexico. That ain't going to happen. So even at that point, these had been early systems. We have a FBI memo from a field agent that we released. It's now one of the most watched, viewed documents on the FBI website of the fact that a field agent at the Roswell, after Roswell, said to J. Edgar Hoover that a disk was downed because we had switched on a new radar system. So let me explain the euphemisms that are used in this field. Radar can track an aircraft by bouncing a wave off of the fuselage, but it also can have piggybacked an active system not to hit it. So you can have an active weapon system embedded in a radar system. So that's what began to be experimented with, and this is why from the mid-40s forward, there were a number of these downed objects that we've been able to document. If we've documented 122 of them, I suspect there have been multiple numbers of that. So what's very important about this, these technologies are unsanctioned. They are illegal operations, and this can be proven in any court of law, and we're about to launch a massive civilian RICO action, racketeer influence, corrupt organization action against the corporations and the individuals involved. These technologies would immediately solve the world's energy, environmental, and poverty problems. Why? These are what people call, a senior executive with a big Fortune 100 company contacted us. They're called, some people say free energy, but they're zero-point and quantum vacuum energy systems, pulling energy out of, let's call it the fabric of space-time. These begin to be developed. Tesla knew about this, so I think Elon Musk doesn't have a Tesla, he has a Musk. A real Tesla, we didn't have to plug in. I'd have one little battery in it. But the point is that these technologies would have a huge revolutionary effect. Macroeconomically, there would be some losers: oil industry, public utilities, nuclear power, now wind, solar, surface roads eventually would be obsolete. So it's a very significant technological advance, and for nearing a century, they have all been withheld. We just released an educational documentary film you can all see called The Lost Century and How to Reclaim It. It's a 2-hour expose of this. I suggest everyone look at it if you have a chance tonight. So these organizations have also been targeting and successfully down the ET vehicles. The covert group has technologies to launch a convincing false flag operation detrimental to the national security. This was the chief topic of my briefing for 3-star General Patrick Hughes at the Pentagon during the Clinton years, because he was not read into this. There were some events that had happened where you could trigger a world war because your top folks in the Congress, the White House, the Pentagon, and CIA, many of them, if they're not part of this covert group, this deep black group illegally, they have no idea what's going on because of the nature of TSSCI, the hyper-compartmentalization that happened in the 50s. So these actions really are a threat to world security and national security, and they have to be reined in immediately. I want to choose my words carefully here. A clock, I understand, has been put on this getting resolved through hearings and other means, and by the end of this year, it needs to be resolved. And that's all I will say at this point. So these actions really are dangerous. They are crimes against humans worldwide. We're going to get into that. And some of these crimes need to be referred to the International Court. Some of them involve, as you'll hear from our attorney, crimes against humanity. We applaud the current actions of the Congress and the President to sign the bill to get to the bottom of this. They have very courageously stepped forward. We're trying to get them everything they would need to know. And I will tell you, the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive literally has everything they would need to know to get to the absolute end of this. It's been handed to them. So the chief characteristics of this illegal secret government called ISG projects, the CIA folks and Pentagon people and most of the people in the government are victims of this. They're not culpable. When people say, why is the government hiding all this? Well, the government is very complex and it's highly compartmentalized. These operations have been run by a clandestine, unsanctioned group. And therefore, our military and our intelligence community and our political leaders are, in fact, victims of this secrecy. I want to refer very briefly to one of the very first CIA director, Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, who in 1961 wrote to the New York Times and said, the secrecy around UFOs is a threat to the national security, not the UFOs. So what has happened is it's all been turned on its head, where they're trying to say, UAPs are a threat. Well, the man-made ones are. The extraterrestrial ones aren't. This has to be made crystal clear to the American people so we don't stumble into an absolute disaster of epic proportions. So these operations that I've been referring to in the United States, we have parallel projects in Australia at Pine Gap. There are projects in the United Kingdom. These are all very sub rosa, off the radar. I have done briefings for the Minister of Defenses of Australia, Canada, and Great Britain. None of them were read into these projects, and yet we had evidence they were ongoing. So they also act without acknowledging any national boundaries. What do I mean by that? So we have an operational facilities in other countries that we move in and out of with alacrity, without any knowledge or approval of that government. So this is also not good, obviously, and dangerous. But because of the nature of our operations, which can be cloaked, that have these AT or ARV vehicles, they can move off radar, they can go in and out of areas, and we have witnesses who can prove what I just said. Blackmail, bribery, and intimidation is the stock and trade, and it's the operational core of this illegal secret government program. Many of our whistleblowers have been threatened and have been blackmailed, and in the case of some of us, attempts at bribery, including myself. Next. So these are the actions we recommend immediately, now that this is all coming out by the Congress and the government. Next. And I want to remind everyone who's in office, and all military know this, I do solemnly swear to affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God. Next. So this is quite a list. I want to go through it very quickly. These have been conveyed over to the government in various offices. This investigation of the UAP issue, and based on the intelligence archive, should happen immediately and be increased in its pace and scope. The presidential executive order needs to occur immediately to stand down all targeting of these extraterrestrial vehicles by these covert projects, because it is dangerous and it is an existential threat to security for the entire world, not just our country. The executive order requiring all military intelligence contractors and other agencies of the U.S. government to disclose to Congress and White House all information, materiel, and technologies and locations and related assets. If not complied with, within around 6 months, we think that the offending party should be prosecuted criminally for treason and other crimes against the United States. The executive order we need an executive order where the State Department and Pentagon coordinate a global diplomatic as opposed to military response to these extraterrestrial civilizations. Should have happened. Barry Goldwater, Senator Goldwater told me it was a, excuse my language, goddamn mistake then and goddamn mistake now that this was ever kept secret like this. He was not allowed in this project. When he tried to get in, General Curtis LeMay told him he could never ask him about it again. We have that whole trail with former Senator Goldwater. So we also need to have an executive order so that the U.S. Patent Office that has seized these zero-point and related technologies under bogus application of the national security laws, and we have a copy of an inventor had one of these happen to him. Those have to be reversed, those patents have to be released, and inventors and scientists around the world that have come across these, look, the laws of the universe are universal, and they've been discovered by folks, they get grabbed, they are either put on a black shelf or they get this national security order slapped on them. Those have to be reversed and those should be released open source to the public. We also need an executive order to immediately require that the U.S. Space Force and Pentagon coordinate assets with the State Department, the United Nations, and other governments to initiate further open communication with these civilizations. The Space Force could be very useful in this regard if it's deployed properly. All of the military would be very important. And I want to emphasize, both the people who work in most of these corporations and in these agencies and the Pentagon have no knowledge excuse me, of these illegal operations. And we should not paint them all with the brush of being culpable. It's not. These are the rogue elements. An executive order to immediately disclose advanced energy generating technologies should happen. These are held by some of these corporations and agencies. This would, within 10 to 20 years, end all pollution on Earth and all global poverty. This is not a pipe dream. Those technologies are extant. They have been around for a while, and we need them, and we need them 60 years ago, 70 years ago. Next. So, you know, these are going to continue, and we don't have time to go through all of these. So the reason I'm going through these is that there's a specific action plan that we have. You can read these. They'll be in the press briefing materials if you need them. And I think it needs to happen very quickly because this is all going to come out, and there needs to be an organized response. Next. The congressional recommendations, Congress should immediately pass a $50 billion research bill to develop and bring forward the safe technologies related to zero-point and quantum vacuum energy systems. We provided 50-some billion for the chip industry. This is way more important. And frankly, it needs to come out very, very soon, given what we're facing with the climate and global poverty issues. That's something that needs to be put on the front burner. It is certainly a more important agenda than the partisan bickering that we see today. Amnesty provisions need to be passed explicitly for people wanting to come forward. I have a major number of folks who are executives, corporate, also whistleblowers, some of whom have been involved in activities that are not legal. If they come forward, they should have immunity so that this can all be unwound in an orderly and peaceful way. That needs to happen very quickly, and it should be included in a bill this year. The Congress should also convene open hearings on this. I understand from discussions with a member of the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee that this has been discussed by the chairman and the Speaker of the House. I think that should be put on the front burner and move forward very quickly. We will provide all information, and have already provided all information they will need. There are, I'm sure, other archives that can be brought to bear, and other whistleblowers are now going to be coming forward, probably several a week at this point. Congress should also pass legislation to explicitly protect the personal safety, like a witness protection program. It is not an exaggeration to say that in the 30-some years I've been dealing with this, I have dealt with multiple people who have been flat out threatened with execution. One of them is sitting here at this table, perhaps more. Next. So this, next slide. One of the things I just want to mention is The Lost Century was crowdfunded, and look at the subtitle, How to Reclaim It. Because there's a century of technological and scientific progress that would greatly benefit all of humanity, not just the United States. We all live on this beautiful sphere floating through space together. It needs to very much come forward. It's 100 years is long enough for secrecy. Next. So I want to introduce someone I've gotten to know. We first met last year. By the way, all of these military guys have been, and corporate folks have been to the Aero SCIF, the Secure Compartment Information Facility. The Disclosure Project has funded all of this for their personal needs and travel. That's why we appreciate your donations and contributions. But Colonel Heckert, he is a retired and very decorated United States Air Force Command pilot. During his extensive career, Colonel Heckert flew over 100 combat reconnaissance missions, including 11 years in high-altitude aircraft developed by the Lockheed Skunk Works. These were not the alien reproduction vehicles, such as the U-2 and the TR-1, and flew alongside the famed SR-71 Blackbird. In the late 70s and early 1980s, Colonel Heckert commanded the nation's largest nuclear monitoring facilities and radiological processing lab, and was responsible for the airborne collection of debris from nuclear explosions worldwide. Later, he was commander of classified operations in the Middle East and subsequently served as a special project director at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, where he was involved with countless classified development operations. Colonel Heckert also spent time working out of Groom Lake, Area 51, where he conducted flight operations and project management, evaluation, and research. Please welcome my friend and hero of our country, Colonel Heckert.
Please. Well, thank you for being here and listening. I need to establish just a couple facts. I've been involved with SCI vaults and code words since 1964, and my last access with the Air Force and other agencies was 1967. For the last 8 months, I've been involved again in SCI discussions, thanks to this gentleman and all of these people sitting next to you and all of those volunteers. The things I want to share are first just a little bit of historical information quickly. You know the name Kelly Johnson. Kelly Johnson and the gentleman, Ben Rich, who succeeded him, I got to know very well. I've got a 1953 UFO report signed by Kelly Johnson and his engineers, and in that same UFO thing, about 4 hours later, it appears over his house. And Dr. Greer has a letter that Kelly Johnson sent to the National Director of Intelligence saying, this is real, this needs to be investigated. I am very fortunate to have been a pilot. I've got over 7,000 hours of time. I currently live in Alaska with my wife, Alice, and a whole bunch of grandchildren, and that's a real blessing. The two documented encounters, and I'm sorry that, do they have that up on the screen, or are they just showing that on? I'll make sure it's available, but these are the two airplanes that I flew that had UFO encounters. The first one was during the latter stages of the Vietnam War. I was flying an operation called Linebacker 3 going into Laos. I was in an orbit at 14,500 feet, just south of the Laotian border, and my two armed escorts, because the RF is unarmed, and they're there to protect me, were delayed on takeoff. So I'm doing just a racetrack type of orbit. There are things that monitor in warfare called GCI sites. These are radar sites that vector in the fighters to the people that are intercepting you. What happens next is that I get an alert from 3 GCI sites and the early foreman AWACS that I've got traffic that is a fast mover near Mach 1 coming out of North Vietnam, Laos, heading for me in orbit. That concerns me because my armed escort isn't there. Now I'm completing about halfway down this next pathway, and they tell me, oh, don't worry, that target is above 70,000 feet, and you know it can't get at you at this point. So I'm a little relieved, but then I finally get to see it, and it's on a wavelength of light that I've only seen one other place, and that is in a nuclear pile on an active nuclear power generation, and it's called Teller light. It is very unique, very white, very, very bright. So we look up, and it's an 11 o'clock, and over here off my left shoulder about 10 o'clock. My backseater is stumbling to make their emergency detection systems and our defensive systems active. We watch this thing, and it's way above there, and I'm a little relieved until all of a sudden, through the mid-term of the orbit, it comes from 70,000 feet down to 12,500 feet in 2 seconds. And now it's tracking off my nose and staying at 5 nautical miles away. That sets off everything in my aircraft. The 3 GCIs and the AWACS are really concerned about me at this point. And as we go on parallel with this thing flying at 5 miles an hour, I'm really concerned. And then they ask me, will you intercept this if you can? Well, the airplane, the RF-4C, is a Mach 2 plus airplane. I've been in flight for a little while, and so I probably, if I go to afterburner, only have about 15 minutes of fuel left. But I agreed to intercept. The reason I did was I have a new, one-of-the-kind IR infrared sensor, but it's on the bottom of the airplane. So my backseater and I agree, hey, this is important. We can see this. We need to document it. I go to afterburner, and we accelerate very quickly through Mach 1, go up to about Mach 1.2, and I close to within 3 nautical miles of this UFO. And we've got it now on our radar. We've got it pegged. The guy in the back seat can't see it on his display because that sensor's pointing down. So I pitch up, do a supersonic climb up, and he says, we got it, we got it, we got it. That white light at 3 miles goes out of sight within less than 2 seconds. And they say, don't worry about it. It's above 80,000 feet in those 2 seconds. I go back to the home base because I'm out of fuel, land, all that material, all the mission material is confiscated, and I'm told, don't talk about it. Well, what happens next is I'm not happy with that answer because I've seen something very, very real. I call the GCI site on what's called the Audubon or telephone system. I say, hey, I'd like to talk to the senior controller that was on duty, tell him I was a UFO pilot that they were just controlling, and he comes on the phone and says, hey, we're all really excited about this. And then I hear him say, yes, sir, Okay, it says bye, click. I couldn't talk to the other two GCI sites, and that goes away, and I never know anything about it until later. The next one is on a U2R, and that's a Blackbird. I'm at 70,000 feet above that on the DMZ of Korea. This has been a combo mission, which means